Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is February 23rd, 2026. And tonight's episode is all about part 29 of our examination of Obadiah, between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James Bible. So Obadiah delivers a concentrated oracle against Edom, the nation descended from Esau, brother of Jacob. Now, this book is brief, yet its message is sharply focused. What begins as a judgment against a specific people unfolds into a theological statement about pride, betrayal, and divine justice. Edom's sin is twofold. First, pride rooted in geography and perceived invincibility. Dwelling in high mountain strongholds, Edom believed itself secure beyond reach. Second, betrayal of kin. When Jerusalem fell and Judah was carried away, Edom did not assist. It rejoiced, looted, and even cut down fugitives. Brotherhood was abandoned in the hour of crisis. So the prophet announces that this arrogance will not stand. Though Edom exalts itself like the eagle, it will be brought down. As it has done, so it will be done to it. Retribution mirrors action, and the day of the Lord, introduced more broadly in other prophetic books, is here applied concretely. Judgment falls upon those who exploit the vulnerable and mock covenant collapse. Yet Obadiah does not conclude with destructive tone alone. Mount Zion will be delivered. The house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. The fire that consumes Esau purifies the covenant line. And the final declaration, well, the kingdom shall be the Lord's, expands the scope beyond Edom to universal sovereignty. The Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James rendering both preserve Obadiah's compact structure and moral clarity. Differences in cadence or terminology do not alter the theological spine. Pride precedes fall. Betrayal invites consequence. And restoration belongs to Zion. The kingdom ultimately belongs to the Lord. That's what we're talking about tonight. Looking forward to the show. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion, who last night, lost his number one place as far as being number one for, 12 times in a row, but this time he's back to being number one. Scorpion saying, "Hey guys, glad to be back with y'all." What's up, Scorpion? Thank you for being here. Number two warrior is Boots Hafner. Boots stating, "Class is in session." Hello, Pastor James Carner, voice of the airwaves and creator of ElitePotion.com. You'll feel energized. Hello, warrior family. Glad to y'all here, and let's hit that thumbs up button for our host. Yeah, that'd be great. If you could all do me a favor, do it with me. Take your thumb and move it down to your phone like I'm doing. Hit the X button, then hit thumbs up just once. I'll try to hit it again. No, just hit it once. It says you're voting too often. And then hit live chat, and you won't lose your spot. All right, guys. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And Boots updated his text. Too late, pal. I already read it wrong. And let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
All right. The operation that killed cartel boss El Mencho left dozens dead, according to officials. Is Mexico under siege or at war? No. But all the sensationalists took that information and said, Mexico's fucked. Well, it's not. if you just paid a little bit of attention, you'd find out that this was an operation by the Mexican army themselves against El Mencho. El means the Mencho. Well, they got him. Had to kill a dozen people before they got him, but that's how Mexico rolls. Now, is Mexico under a crisis? No. Did it ruin tourism? No. Well, they have a drug problem, and they also have a president who has ties to the drug cartels. Now, some will say that's speculation, and I might agree. But there have been some journalists who have actually found some interesting stuff. Now, that doesn't mean she does drugs, but it does mean, well, something fishy's going on over there. And it's probably not a good idea to have a drug cartel run your country. So maybe she's trying to crack down on some of those who won't listen to her. I don't know, and I don't care. More than 5,000 flights canceled as U.S. East Coast digs out of record snow. So what? It happens. Stocks drop after Trump ramps up new tariffs and investors dump potential AI investments. Wow. All that because Trump raised tariffs? Kind of stretching a little bit, PBS? Yeah, just a little. FBI released Nancy Guthrie doorbell photo captured on separate date. Doesn't look like much of a criminal at all, just a dummy who just can't seem to do this correctly. My guess is they're never going to make any money off of this. They screwed the pooch. The mom is dead, and that's it. Now, sorry, Susanna, that happened to you, but it's sure digging up a lot of stuff that you've been involved with that's making the American people go, interesting. So, I don't know. I don't care. Trump's top general foresees acute risks in an attack on Iran. Now, the top generals are saying, it's a risk, but it's just acute. It's just acute. Who cares? Town by town, the snow totals. Here's what's fallen so far in Massachusetts. Who cares? My God, there's nothing on the news that actually is beautiful and nice and polite. But that's how it goes. I wish there were more news, and I wish I could give you, some enlightenment. Well, what I can do is say this. You are a child of the Most High and don't have to worry about any of that stuff. All right? The news is and has been proven to be propaganda. Whether it's for the Orsini family or the Lee family, one or the other. It's up to you to believe what they both have to say. And that's breaking news. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the book of Obadiah, our examination of the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James Bible. Stick around, it'll be fun.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Hey, George, why is the IRS taking so much of my money? Why would you bring that binding contract onto my vessel? I thought we were all in the same boat and pay our taxes. You mean taxation without representation? You should have never worn a red coat on this ship with those ridiculous forms. You don't even live in D.C. I've been rolling in my grave since 1913. Why are you binding yourself to a contract to Washington, D.C. that has no bearing on you? For this reason, we set the 13 colonies free from this type of tax.
Do you know what this document is? It protects you from a direct tax from the national government. Which of these would you rather live by? What about you? Do you also sign binding contracts every April 15th? Click the link below and regain your freedom.
All right, we're back, and tonight we're going to be talking about the book of Obadiah. Now, the vision concerns Edom, a nation carved into cliffs, dwelling in rock and height, speaks with confidence. They say, "Who will bring me down?" That's what it says in the Bible. And elevation becomes illusion. Security becomes arrogance. The mountain feels permanent for them. But the Lord answers, "Though you soar like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, you will be brought down." Height does not equal immunity. Pride has already measured the fall. The charge is not arrogance alone, it is betrayal. When Jerusalem fell, Edom stood aside. They did nothing. When strangers entered the gates, Edom rejoiced. They said, "Get rid of those guys." Bad idea. When captives were carried away, Edom looked on without any grief. And when fugitives fled, Edom handed them over. Brotherhood dissolved under advantage. Now, it says in the Bible, "As you have done, it shall be done to you." Well, the principle is simple and severe here. Retribution mirrors action. The cup passed to others will return to the hand that filled it. The day of the Lord approaches not only for Edom, but for all nations. What was witnessed in one valley becomes universal decree. Pride collapses. Violence answers itself. Yet the book does not end in rubble. Mount Zion will be delivered. The house of Jacob will possess what was lost. Fire consumes stubble, but covenant remains. And the final word rises above mountain and ruin alike. The kingdom shall be the Lord's, not Edom's height, not Judah's failure, not any nation's fortress. Well, Obadiah, it's a very brief book, and his message is not pride falls, Zion rises, not the Zionists from Europe, and the kingdom belongs to the Lord. So Obadiah opens without narrative delay. There is no extended introduction, no historical framing beyond the title. The message is immediate and singular. Translation, again, must preserve the clarity here of the prophetic announcement without diminishing its scope. And though the oracle is directed toward Edom, its tone signals something larger than regional tension. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "The vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations, saying, 'Arise and let us rise up against her for battle.'" Here it is the same in King James rendering. The vision of Obadiah. "Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise, ye, and let us rise up against her in battle." So between both canons, the alignment is very strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with clarity, "A report from the Lord, a messenger among the nations." Now, the King James retains the older terminology, rumor, ambassador, heathen. In context, Rumor means proclamation rather than uncertainty. But both preserve the sense of international summons initiated by divine decree. Robert Gertison just showed up. What's up, pal? Saying, hi, everyone. Hi, James. Looking forward to learning about Obadiah. So the prophetic voice blends heavenly counsel and earthly mobilization. The nations are stirred not by random ambition, but by divine orchestration. Edom's downfall is not accidental. It is announced. Now, theologically, this opening establishes sovereignty. The Lord governs not only Israel, but the nations. Judgment upon Edom is framed within a larger divine purpose. The vision is not personal grievance, it is covenant response within global oversight. Tone determines whether the passage here feels like geopolitical agitation or prophetic proclamation. Well, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and immediacy. The King James cadence deepens solemnity through formal rhythm and archaic diction, as it always does, but neither alters doctrine. So this sets the stage. A report has gone out. The nations are then summoned. The vision concerns Edom, but the authority behind it is universal. So we need to continue listening to whether translation preserves both prophetic brevity and sovereign scope here. In Obadiah, the message begins with declaration. Judgment has been announced. Now, after the summons to the nations, the focus narrows directly onto Edom's inner posture. The charge is not merely geopolitical rivalry, but arrogance rooted in elevation. The translation must preserve both the imagery of height and the moral diagnosis of pride. Surfer Wife has just joined us saying, hey, family, what is up? Here's another verse in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Witness, and I quote, Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be greatly despised. Ouch. It doesn't say ouch. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Here's the same verse in the King James Bible. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee. Thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? So the alignment here is pretty strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads plainly, the pride of your heart has deceived you. The King James again retains older cadence, hath deceived thee. But both preserve the diagnosis. Self-exaltation leads to self-deception. Here, we need to take an example of this. Okay, this isn't just about some city high up in the rocks. This is about you and maybe you in your workplace and how you have a high up position and you are not helping others. You're helping yourself and you're laughing at others. Well, this is what we're trying to address. Pride comes fall. With your pride, if you are arrogant and you're not loving and helping your neighbor, especially in a workplace, you will not remain high up, not according to what the Bible says. So the alignment between the Ethiopian phrasing, it reads plainly, and the King James with older cadence, but both preserve the diagnosis. self-exaltation leads to self-deception, meaning those who are high up, they're deceiving themselves. And that is what we're trying to address here tonight, which, by the way, I really need to, it's really bothering me. Yeah, there we go. I knew something was wrong, man. Something was wrong. My computer was off a little. So the imagery then intensifies. Here it is in the Ethiopian rendering, and I quote, "Though you exalt yourself as high as the eagle, and though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord." Here's that same in the King James rendering. "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." Well, the language is nearly identical. The Ethiopian wording clarifies elevation. The King James deepens a poetic rhythm. The theological force is unchanged, and no height is beyond divine reach. Edom's geography shaped its confidence, just like a vice president title. Mountain fortresses fostered illusion of permanence. The prophet exposes the false equation between elevation and immunity. Now, theologically, this establishes a principle that transcends Edom. Pride precedes downfall. Security rooted in position rather than righteousness becomes fragile. The Lord opposes arrogance, whether in nation or individual. Now, let's say you have a boss that is acting like a pompous ass, and you want to take it into your own hands and, hurt them so you can rise up. That's not your job. It's the Lord's. And this is what we're supposed to learn here from Obadiah. God is the one that will take out the VP who is hurting everyone. You need to just let it go and know that the Lord is in control. Because Edom was basically meant to not be taken out. And in your thought, that VP or that boss of yours that you don't like, that nobody likes, God is saying, I'm going to do it. Thus saith the Lord. Now, theologically, this establishes a principle that transcends Edom and tone. And the Lord actually opposes arrogance, whether in nation and individual. So tone determines whether this feels like poetic exaggeration or covenant warning. Now, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and moral diagnosis. And it's easier to understand because it's been translated from Ge'ez to Amharic to modern English. Now, we are comparing against the King James Old English, and there are huge differences in tone. But again, neither alters doctrine. The King James intensifies solemnity through repetition, but the Ethiopian gives us the moral clarity. Now, this sharpens the central charge here. Edom's downfall begins not with invasion, but with their pride. Height becomes vulnerability. So, this should continue. You should. Listening for whether translation preserves both imagery and moral weight. And in Obadiah, pride deceives before judgment descends. So after exposing pride, Obadiah names the deeper offense, betrayal. They betrayed Israel. And the sin of Edom is not abstract arrogance alone, but violence and opportunism against their own kin. Yeah. Translation here needs to preserve the relational dimension between the two canons. And this is not merely conflict between neighboring states. It is fracture within a shared lineage. Same thing can happen within a family. When one person is disrupting everything, but they've got this title in the family, and they have not helped out any of the family that was fractured from, let's just say, a marriage, and that they felt that their title would help them be held up. Well, God doesn't like it when people do that. Therefore, once they turn to pride, they will not last. And we're trying to learn something here, that God will intervene, regardless if it's a nation or an individual. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "For violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried away his captives, you were as one of them." Here's the same, but in the King James rendering. "For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, even thou wast as one of them." So the alignment between both canons, it's strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with clarity, "your brother Jacob." And the King James retains an older structure, "thy brother Jacob," but both preserve the relational accusation. But then the betrayal actually intensifies. Here it is in the Ethiopian rendering. "You should not rejoiced. You should not have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor spoken proudly in the day of distress." Here's that same in the King James rendering. "But thou shouldst not have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, neither shouldst thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress." So the repetition of "in the day" emphasizes the timing here. Edom's sin is compounded by context. Vulnerability was met with celebration. Kinship was replaced by advantage. But theologically, this clarifies the covenant responsibility beyond borders. Shared ancestry deepens accountability. To stand aside in crisis is itself an indictment. To rejoice in collapse multiplies the guilt. So again, tone determines whether this passage between both canons merely is historical or morally universal. While the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes the clarity and ethical directness, you can understand it clearly. The King James cadence deepens the solemn gravity through repetition and parallel structure, but neither alters doctrine. And this really exposes the heart of the offense. It's pride deceived. Betrayal followed. Brotherhood was forgotten. Now, we should still continue, as we move on, to listen for whether translation preserves both relational weight and moral severity. Well, in Obadiah, violence against Jacob is violence against covenant. Shame then answers betrayal. Obadiah now moves from inward posture to outward action. The charge expands beyond silent betrayal to active participation in Judah's suffering. Again, translation needs to preserve both the clarity of accusation here and the escalating severity. But the language becomes repetitive and precise, almost legal in its cataloging. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. You should not have gazed upon their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity." So the King James rendering, it says, and I quote, thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Repetition a little? Just a tad. Well, the alignment is strong between both. The Ethiopian phrasing reads plainly and directly. The King James preserves the rhythmic repetition in the day of their calamity, while the repetition intensifies the moral weight there. Each action compounds the offense. Then the charge continues. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those who escaped, nor delivered up those who remained in the day of distress." Here's the same in the King James. "Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape, neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress." So the language remains closely aligned here. The Ethiopian wording, it clarifies position, stood at the crossroads. Well, the King James retains the older phrasing, stood in the crossway, but both preserve the image of intercepting fugitives. Theologically, this section reveals escalating from indifference to exploitation to violence. Edom, the city carved up high up in the rocks, did not merely rejoice, it looted. It did not merely observe, it intercepted refugees. So covenant betrayal became active harm against the vulnerable, against their own kind. Now, the repetition of "in the day," that emphasizes that the timing magnifies the guilt. Judah's collapse was not neutral opportunity. It was sacred vulnerability. Tone should determine whether this passage feels accusatory or judicial. Well, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes the clarity and moral sequencing, but the King James cadence deepens the solemn intensity through its rhythmic repetition. But neither alters doctrine. But you could see a tone of anger in God through the King James, where in the modern Ethiopian translation, this is what happens when you mess with the Lord's people. And it doesn't matter if you are the Lord's people too. So this completes the exposure of Edom's conduct. Pride birthed betrayal. Betrayal became violence. The vulnerable were handed over. So again, we need to continue listening for whether the translation preserves both moral gravity and structured indictment. In Obadiah, the charge is not abstract hostility. It is specific harm done in a day of distress, when they needed them the most. So after cataloging Edom's pride and betrayal, Obadiah declares the governing principle of judgment. The tone shifts from description of past wrongdoing to pronouncement of consequence. Translation must preserve the symmetry embedded in the language, and the punishment does mirror the action. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "For the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return upon your own head." Here's the same in the King James rendering. "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen." Heathen means outside cities of Jerusalem, or the chosen ones. "As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head." Well, the alignment is strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with clarity. Your deeds shall return. The King James uses thy reward, reflecting older English for recompense rather than benefit. but both preserve the principle of measured return. Then the scope expands even beyond Edom. Here it is in the Ethiopian rendering. For as you drank on my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yes, they shall drink and swallow, and they shall be as though they had never been. Here's the same transcript, but in the King James rendering. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. Well, the Ethiopian wording, it clarifies continuity. The King James retains a rhythmic repetition. Drink, swallow down. Well, the imagery, it conveys humiliation and downfall extended universally, but it still carries a very angry God tone. But theologically, this section establishes the moral, I can't even pronounce, reciprocity. Man, there's some words I'm just, as divine justice. And judgment is not arbitrary. Judgment reflects action. So what was inflicted then returns. What was celebrated becomes endured. And this is an example of what we should expect from other countries, from other corporations, from other cities and counties, and all other organizations that with pride comes fall. So it shouldn't surprise you if America at one time falls, because God doesn't allow countries to continuously hurt his people. And this is kind of like what goes around comes around, but in biblical terms. Now, theologically, this establishes the moral, I already talked this, reciprocity as divine justice. And judgment is not arbitrary, but it does reflect action. What was inflicted returns, and what was celebrated becomes endured. So the day of the Lord is no longer confined to Edom alone. It encompasses all nations, okay? We all feel like we're going through trials and tribulations here. But what the Bible is telling us is that those people who are up there stealing, killing, and destroying, they're not going to be up there forever. And what evil has learned over all of these times is they figured out, oh, well, all we need to do is just replace those leaders with short-term leaders, and then we can avoid judgment. This is what the dynasties use the Bible for. They do everything opposite to make sure that they win and gain. So this is why the dynasties don't stay or live in countries. They put their house right on the border of two countries where they have no jurisdiction or allegiance to one or the other. This is why they move from country to country, stealing resources like a virus. It comes and it goes, but they go back underground because they know that God will come back and take them down. I hope you guys understand this. You see, the more we research the dynasties and elites and the Satanists, whatever you want to call them, the ones who have all of the money, they are doing everything backwards from what the Bible says God will do, and they purposely reap the rewards because of God's patience. But their reward is just temporary. when it comes to long term. What I'm saying is, those that use the Bible this way as evil by hiding and replacing presidents, but actually being the one that selects them and puts them in and under the control of the dynasty, they have their reward now. But after death, that's another thing. So the day of the Lord is no longer confined to Edom alone. It encompasses all nations. The betrayal of Jacob becomes emblematic of a broader principle. Those who exploit the vulnerable and mock covenant collapse will face measured return. This is why we're starting to see the whole Epstein thing come crumbling down on the elite, and they're scrambling to continue to get ahead of the narrative by slowing down the investigative process, slowing down the judicial process to get ahead of it before they get caught, called out for their wickedness. And they know the Bible better than you do. And they know how long God takes to initiate judgment because they've counted and measured and know. And they hide behind religion in order to keep their control. But God sees everything. So this also is a good indicator of understanding that dynasties come and go, because God is not going to allow them to continue with their stealing, killing, and destroying, even after Jesus paid the atonement. But you can bet that they understand the laws of God better than you do, because they have completely rejected God for mammon. So eventually, they will face their measured return. But it's not going to be like you want it to be. They're going to be caught, but in ways that won't ever satisfy you. Like all of the 13 black nobilities being hung in front of the entire world. Doesn't work that way. It won't go that way. And we have to understand that God knows all of the corruption that's out there. God knows their hearts, and He knows yours. He knows what they're doing. He hasn't stopped being God. We perish for lack of knowledge. That's not on God, that's on us. So tone here in Obadiah, between both the Ethiopian and the King James, it again determines whether this last passage feels vindicative or judicial. But the Ethiopian phrasing, it emphasizes clarity and inevitability. You can understand it easier. The King James cadence does deepen the solemn force through repetition and parallel structure, but neither, again, alters doctrine. So this part stands as the axis of Obadiah. Pride led to betrayal. Violence followed. Now consequence mirrors conduct. And this examination continues to listen for whether translation preserves both symmetry and universality. Now, in Obadiah, justice is reciprocal. As it was done, so it will be returned. And after establishing retributive justice, as you have done, it shall be done to you, Obadiah then widens the horizon. What began as an oracle against Edom becomes a declaration concerning all nations. So again, translation needs to preserve this expansion without diminishing the immediacy of the warning of Obadiah. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "For the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return upon your own head." Same in the King James rendering, and I quote, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head." You know, the first thing that pops in my head here is America's CIA, Israel's Mossad, British MI6, these secret service agencies that go into innocent countries, divide and conquer it, put in a leader that they chose in order to control the country and steal its resources. What Obadiah is saying is that will be done back upon that country. And what we're witnessing right now, you don't, maybe, well, my audience who are, who've been following me for the past 2 years, they know. But the same thing that we did to other countries is being done to America right now. Blue states are controlled by China. Red states are controlled by Europe. This isn't fantasy. This isn't a joke. This is documented. China has infiltrated our country by controlling a majority of our ports in our own country. And governors, senators, Congress people have been favoring China over American policy. This isn't a lie. What we're witnessing is China infiltrating our country like the CIA did to all the others, and dividing, conquering, and then they put in their own leader. Well, any Democrat that becomes the president in the United States of America is working for China, because everything that they pass favors China export imports. Every time a red state or Republican comes in, it removes all of the previous blue state president and their executive orders and goes after all of the work they did to control those ports. And what I'm saying is, what goes around comes around. America is not going to ever be immune to what it's done to other countries, and we're learning this from Obadiah. Just because we have the best military equipment and more people than other armies, which I don't think we have more than China, but as far as manpower, human beings in the army, does not mean that we can't be taken out. When Trump came in working for the Orsinis don't want to lose control over America. No way. Trump came in and he started checking all the imports of all the transistors in every electrical station all across America. It just so happened that China, we were buying their transistors, which had their computer chips. Who knows if they wrote a back door? You can build a chip within a chip. It can look like it's functioning, but you won't know the difference if there's another chip inside of there talking to some other back door. That's all I'm saying. Again, this purple comes on here and says, Alabama John said he wants to talk to you right now. He is also live on Rumble. Come over when you can. Can you give me any more information here, Purple, by the way? Because you're confusing me. I don't know who this Alabama John is, and you're not giving me any real reputable information to get me to stop the show and then come on over there when I can. If you can reply and say, yes, because you're talking about this subject, and this subject is what Alabama John is talking about currently, and he's interested in you. Okay, that would make sense. Then I would go, all right, well, maybe after the show, I'll visit Alabama John. However, you need to give me some more context before I can just stop what I'm doing. Now, this could be just a bot where they go on to all kinds of different live shows and try to steer people over to Alabama John, whom I have no idea who he is. Or she. Who knows? So back to Obadiah, the alignment between both the Ethiopian witness and the King James canon, they remain strong yet again in the last verse. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes the clarity, all the nations. Okay. The King James retains the older terminology, all the heathen. And remember, we learned that heathen just means a nation outside of the children of Israel or Judah. Outside of. Heathen does not mean devil worshipers. So in context, both refer broadly to the nations beyond Israel. So the scope is universal. Then the declaration continues. Here it is in the Ethiopian rendering, and I quote, "For as you drank on my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually." Here's the same in the King James rendering. "For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually." Well, the imagery of drinking functions as symbol of judgment. What was consumed in arrogance becomes a cup of consequence. The Ethiopian wording reads pretty directly. And the King James cadence, it seems to intensify with repetition. Now, theologically, that section reveals that Edom's judgment is not isolated retaliation, but it exemplifies a principle governing all nations. All. And the day of the Lord is near, not distant speculation, but an impending reckoning. What's up, Philip? So the phrase is near does carry weight. Translation again must preserve the urgency here. The day is not abstract theology, it approaches history. So tone again determines whether the passage is heard as nationalistic triumph or universal accountability. I'm thinking universal accountability. Now, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes the clarity and scope here. The King James, it deepens the solemnity through rhythmic parallelism, but neither alter doctrine. Yet, if you read it with the tone of the King James, you may read it as a nationalistic triumph. Yeah. So this part really transitions Obadiah from the regional indictment to a global proclamation. Edom's pride becomes warning not just to the city of Edom, but to all nations. So the examination again continues, listening for whether translation preserves both universality and immediacy here. In Obadiah, the day of the Lord is not confined to one mountain. It reaches all nations. Now, after declaring the day of the Lord upon all nations, Obadiah narrows again to the ancient fracture between Jacob and Esau. The tone becomes contrastive. It's a contrast. Two houses stand in opposition, one restored, the other consumed. So translation again needs to preserve both the imagery of fire and the covenant distinction. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, But on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance, and it shall be holy. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau shall be stubble. Here's the same in the King James rendering. Get ready to feel anger. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. So the alignment between both the Ethiopian and King James is strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads clearly, there shall be deliverance. Now, the King James, it still preserves its rhythmic parallelism. There shall be holiness. But both retain the covenant center. Mount Zion becomes the place of restoration, but reading the King James sounds like, well, all hell's coming. But the alignment, it's strong. Now, the fire imagery then intensifies. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, they shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau. Here's the same under King James. And they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. The language is nearly identical. The Ethiopian wording clarifies the finality of it. The King James maintains the solemn cadence, but the tone really emphasizes anger. But the theological message between both is very sharp, and reversal is complete. Jacob and Esau, brothers in origin, now represent divergent destinies here. Pride and betrayal have consequences. Covenant fidelity then carries restoration. You guys remember the story of Jacob and Esau? You remember how they had their little split? Because Esau was supposed to get the blessing. Jacob was convinced by his mother to dress up in a suit made of bear fur, because apparently Esau was just completely hairy, and Israel blessed Jacob instead of Esau, and Esau came back. But remember, Jacob, even before that happened, when Esau came back from battle, Jacob basically sold Esau, or Esau sold his inheritance to Jacob just for a bowl of soup. So for a long time, they didn't get along until the end, when God preserved their relationship. But after they became different nations, well, shit went down. And Jacob and Esau were long gone by this time. So theologically, this section does affirm that deliverance belongs to Zion while arrogance collapses. The house of Jacob, once vulnerable, becomes instrument of judgment. And the house of Esau, once elevated, becomes stubble. So God's trying to say, it doesn't matter how big or strong you think you are, your pride will get the better of you. Doesn't that happen to us all? It happened to me. So tone, again, determines whether this passage is heard as ethnic triumph or a covenant contrast. Well, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and narrative flow. I understand the Ethiopian one better than I understand the King James Bible. But the King James cadence deepens solemn gravity through poetic structure, and unless you understand the Old English cadence, you won't see the real information here. But neither alters the doctrine. Meaning, It doesn't steer God's word into another direction. Now, I need to be, again, very clear here that when I started this examination between the King James and the Ethiopian canon, I had a bias. I had a bias against the King James because I've done so much research and have seen so much of the Catholic Church doing bad that I just naturally assumed that the King James, because of the Catholic Church, because of perhaps the Vatican, because of all of the different things that have changed over the years, that they did wrong according to the sight of God by removing the Apocrypha. But we haven't found any evidence of it. No book, no print, no tablet, nothing, no scroll that says, yep, they decided on this day to remove the Apocrypha because of this. It just simply wasn't there, and we don't know why. And I did have a bias against the Catholic Church because, well, they've done some bad things over the past. But so far, throughout the beginning, from Genesis all the way up to now, Obadiah, we have found that the tone of the King James sure makes you think that God is angry. But if you don't understand the Old English cadence and what the words really mean. So when you read it in modern English or in modern English training in your head, you're not going to understand it. You're going to view it as tonally upsetting. Well, you read the Ethiopian translation into modern English, it's not. So again, tone determines whether this passage is heard as ethnic triumph or covenant contrast. So the Ethiopian phrasing, it does emphasize the clarity and narrative flow here. But the King James, it deepens again the solemn gravity through its poetic structure, but neither alters doctrine. So this part marks the decisive reversal in the book. What was humiliated is restored. What exalted itself is then consumed. So the examination, again, we need to continue to listen for whether translation preserves both contrast and covenant center. In Obadiah, the fracture between brothers reaches its final reckoning. Mount Zion stands. Esau falls. So Obadiah now intensifies the imagery introduced in previous section. And the contrast between Jacob and Esau becomes combustible. So again, translation here must preserve the metaphor without any exaggeration. So the language is poetic yet decisive. Here it is in the Ethiopian canon, and I quote, "The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, but the house of Esau shall be stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau." Here it is in the King James. "And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, for they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau." So the alignment between both is close. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity, burn and consume them. The King James, again, preserves the rhythmic repetition, kindle, devour, kindle, devour, kindle, devour, kindle, devour. But the emphasis is total reversal. And fire, that functions symbolically. It purifies and it consumes. The house, once betrayed, becomes the agent of consequence. The house, once exalted, becomes fuel. So theologically, this part underscores the moral reciprocity at covenant scale. Reciprocal, but reciprocity. Pride and violence do not dissolve quietly. They meet decisive end. The promise that no survivor shall remain, that expresses the finality, but in poetic form. So the translation nuance, it shapes cadence more than the doctrine. Because if you read it in the King James, you're seeing more of an angry God. And the Ethiopian rendering, it emphasizes the clarity and flow, while the King James cadence intensifies the solemn force through parallel structure and archaic phrasing, which can confuse a lot of people. But again, neither alters the outcome, because the reversal is then complete. So this completes the contrast that was begun with pride in the heights. Remember, the city of Edom was up in the air, carved into rock, and the elevation of Edom becomes its vulnerability. The humiliation of Jacob becomes restoration. So again, our examination continues listening for whether translation preserves both poetic intensity and the covenant logic between both Ethiopian and the King James. In Obadiah, fire answers stubble, and reversal answers arrogance. So after declaring the final reversal between Jacob and Esau, Obadiah turns to restoration in territorial terms. The tone then shifts from destruction to redistribution. Again, translation must preserve the geographical detail without losing any theological emphasis. The land functions not merely as territory, but as covenant inheritance. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "The south shall possess the mountains of Esau, and the lowland shall possess Philistia. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim, and the fields of Samaria. Benjamin shall possess Gilead." Here's the same in the King James rendering. "And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim, and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead." Well, the alignment between both cadences are strong. The Ethiopian phrasing clarifies the regional references, the south, the lowland. The King James retains its older designations, they of the south, they of the plain, but both preserve the territorial reversal. Then the restoration actually expands. Here it is in the Ethiopian rendering. "And the captives of the host of the children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. The captives of Jerusalem are in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south." Here's the same in the King James Bible. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. "And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath, and the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south." So the wording remains aligned. The Ethiopian phrasing reads directly. The King James preserves the archaic construction, the captivity of the host, and the theological meaning is unchanged. But what was lost is now reclaimed. Now, the geographical detail reinforces the covenant continuity. Inheritance is not erased by exile. The land remains tied to promise. Now, theologically, this section affirms the restoration as tangible but not abstract. Zion's deliverance includes renewed possession. The redistribution mirrors the earlier retributive justice. Blah. But tone determines whether the passage feels merely territorial or covenantal. The Ethiopian phrasing does emphasize clarity and narrative continuity. It makes more sense to me when I read the Ethiopian. But the King James cadence does deepen the solemn resonance through its formal structure and Old English cadence, but neither alters doctrine. So this section of the book, it moves from destruction of Esau to restoration of Jacob's inheritance. Pride fell. Zion stands. The land returns to covenant alignment. So the examination between both cadences, between both books, both canons, Ethiopian and King James, continues listening for whether translation preserves both geographic specificity and theological restoration. Now, in Obadiah, inheritance answers exile. The covenant line possesses again. Next, Obadiah closes with elevation beyond geography. After pride has been exposed, betrayal judged, reversal enacted, and inheritance restored, the final word is not territory, but sovereignty. Again, translation must preserve the brevity and weight of the closing declaration. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo witness, and I quote, "Then saviors shall come to Mount Zion to judge the mountains of Esau, and the kingdoms shall be the Lord's." Here's that same in the King James rendering. "And saviors shall come up on Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's." While the alignment is strong, the Ethiopian phrasing reads clearly, "The kingdom shall be the Lord's." The King James preserves the archaic cadence, "saviors shall come up," but both maintain the decisive conclusion. The mention of saviors or deliverers, it signals agents of restoration. Yet the final authority does not belong to them. Their activity culminates in a singular truth: the kingdom belongs to the Lord. Now, theologically, this final verse expands the book's scope beyond Edom and Judah. Pride and betrayal are addressed within a larger reality of divine kingship. Territorial shifts and national collapses occur under overarching sovereignty. But tone determines whether the closing feels abrupt or if it's just simply climactic. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes the clarity and theological finality here, while the King James cadence deepens solemn resonance through repetition and archaic form. But again, neither alters doctrine. Now, Obadiah ends without elaboration. The mountain strongholds that seemed permanent fall. Zion is restored. Inheritance is reclaimed. The final word settles above all nations and heights alike. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. Now, to conclude, it's a short book. Obadiah is brief, but its arc is complete. The vision begins with Edom's pride in the heights and ends with the declaration of divine kingship. Beneath those points, betrayal is exposed. Violence against the vulnerable is named. Retributive justice is pronounced. And Zion's restoration is affirmed. Across both the Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James Bible, the theological spine remains firm. Pride deceives. Betrayal compounds guilt. As you have done, it shall be done to you. That governs the logic of judgment. From then even till now. And the day of the Lord expands from Edom to all nations. Mount Zion stands as the center of deliverance. The house of Jacob rises. The house of Esau becomes stubble. Now, where differences appear, they are tonal rather than doctrinal. The Ethiopian phrasing often provides contemporary clarity in geographical and moral references. The King James preserves the cadence and the formal rhythm through archaic structure. But neither alters the central message here. Arrogance invites downfall. Covenant violence invites consequence. And restoration belongs to the Lord's sovereign plan. So Obadiah closes not with Edom's ruin alone, but with sovereignty declared. The final sentence gathers mountain pride, national rivalry, and covenant restoration under one truth. And that truth is simple. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. Guys, thank you so much. I love you. I'm grateful for you to be here to watch this show. Tomorrow we may do another rendition of the Ethiopian versus the King James, or I may do something that, people are freaking out about, try to calm everybody down. I'm going to be exiting here and going live on TikTok if you're interested in following, and let's see if I can get shut down over there yet again. God bless you. God keep you. We'll see you tomorrow.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.